I want to finish off the material on repeated games, maybe 5-10 minutes, I'm hoping, and then talk about this problem of credibility and trust in Chapter 10. And I've said it a couple of times, and I'll keep saying is that for the exam, 20 marks on the exam will be associated with you being able to identify the 10 ways that Dixit and Skeeth have of making commitments and threats and promises believable or credible. So I want you to know what those 10 ways are, be able to write 1 or 2 sentences about them, and if you have to, kind of be prepared to give a little example for a couple of them. Okay, so that's the idea. There'll be 20 marks in the exam, and it's yours for the taking. Okay. Now, next Tuesday, because Monday is a holiday, we'll kind of wrap up the course. I hope we will get through the material that I need to today on the credible commitment stuff. And I'd like to take that time to kind of just do a bit of a summary overview and maybe a couple of interesting applications to see how you could use these ideas of game theory to help your thinking. So let's have a look at the repeated prisoner's dilemma that we were looking at in the last class. Now, remember, the concept here is that we have a particular type of game, a simple game, and we're thinking of just repeating it over and over and over and over again, okay? And so what we have to do is think about strategies in the big game, not just what we call the little short-run game, which is called a stage game. So you want to distinguish between those two, the strategies in the short-run game or the stage game, and the strategies in the overall game. Now, in these repeated games, a really interesting concept is the idea of a trigger strategy. Okay, so that, remember, in a repeated game, there's this interaction going on, and it's a sequential game, so the players can turn around and see what happened in previous periods or plays of this game. So their strategies could be made conditional on or dependent on what has happened in the past, and that's the key, kind of a new strategic sort of idea here. And a trigger strategy works like this. It's sort of, I want to capture something about the past, and that's going to change my behavior. I got to work out what I'm going to do, given I've seen that behavior in the past. Okay. Now, it's also, you'll be forward-looking as well, but your strategy will say, given I've certain things I've seen in the past, it's going to trigger an action now. Now, there's 2 strategies we identified. Yesterday, we looked at what's called the Grimm strategy. See if I can click on the right button here. Nah, I can't right at the moment. I have to get up to this other stuff. The Grimm strategy is we're going to cooperate together, but if you ever defect in the prisoner's dilemma, then I'm never going to cooperate with you again. Okay, so it's like for the rest of the future, you're not going to cooperate, but I will cooperate as long as you cooperate. So it's got that conditional element too. Okay. Now, in other games that we'll see, it could be could be a trust game, it could be a coordination game. It could be a game of threats. Again, it's just repeated and repeated. And usually the players would like to do something cooperative together or have some cooperative outcome. So we'll keep using this language of cooperation. And the Grimm strategy is saying, okay, as long as things are working out okay, then I will keep cooperating and doing this thing, which might be against my best interest in the short run. But as soon as you take advantage of me, then forever. That's why it's called the Grim one, Grim Reaper kind of thing, until death do us part sort of thing. Well, I guess we will part. You will defect or do the non-cooperative thing, go back to your self-interested behavior. Okay, so that's the idea of the Grimm strategy. There's another kind of interesting strategy, though, which is the tit-for-tat strategy. Now, tit-for-tat is a little different than the Grimm strategy. It's sort of saying, look, I'm going to cooperate with you. I keep cooperating with you. You cooperate with me. We have a couple of players who are playing these strategies. We'll keep on cooperating. But if for some reason you should defect, then I can look back and see that, and I'm going to defect, but not forever, just until you start cooperating again. Once you start cooperating again, you will trigger me back into the cooperative mode. Okay. So the tit for tat is kind of if you like, it's a little bit more forgiving than the Grimm strategy. Okay? So let's have a look at how tit for tat will work in this simple 2x2 game. And the idea is that in period 1, they're cooperating. In period 2, they're cooperating. In period 3, they're cooperating. And then in period 4, let's just imagine the blue players that are thinking, what's going to happen if I defect? Okay. Well, from the payoff matrix, what's going to happen is the blue player's payoff is going to go up to 70. The other player's, he's the sucker here. He was kept cooperating, and the other guy took advantage of them in the person's dilemma. His payoff went down to 36. But for the blue player, compared to always cooperating, I'm going to get a gain of 10. So that's like your gain in the short run. Okay. On the other hand, if I don't want this to be going on forever, losing this forever, I'm going to have to get back on track, which means I'm going to have to cooperate. The blue player goes back to cooperating, but the red player now, having looked back and seen the guy has defected, he's playing tit for tat. He said, okay, you defect on me, I'm defecting on you in the next round. And so the blue player is going to have to get this low payoff and make this minus 24. And then in the next round, the red player will see that he's cooperated. The blue player will look back and think, I'm staying on track here. I saw that was just retaliating there. I'm getting back on track. So that's the idea, is I'm going to deviate and then try and get back on track. What's that? How does that affect my payoffs? Okay. Well, what it does is, you get the stream of payoffs 60, 60, 60. You get a little short run gain. You kind of have a bigger loss. Okay. And then you're back on track getting your cooperative payoffs. Now, yesterday I looked at this idea of discounting, okay, and I kind of went quickly over the difference between a discount factor and a discount rate. It's a little bit easier to understand with tit for tat because there's only really one period ahead that you have to worry about, okay. So what we think is the trade-off here for each of the players is they're thinking about defecting, and so we're trying to figure out, is it worth it or not? Is it a best response or not? Is to look at this loss and compare it to the gain now. Okay, but remember, they're different things. It's not. This is obviously a bigger number, but it's later on. Okay, and it's later on means, well, might not happen. Okay, maybe the game will end. There's some chance or uncertainty. Or later on might mean I'm impatient. I don't care about losing 24 now. I need this 10 today. Okay, so the idea would be we want to discount the loss of 24, and we use this discount factor, delta, Greek letter for D for discount. Okay. Another way to think about this is to look at the present value of this 24. And people who work with financial figures are like this sort of idea, and it works something like this. You're sort of thinking, I got $1 today, okay, and next period, there's an interest rate. I can invest this money, okay, and let's say I could get 20%, a lot, okay, but $1 today might be worth $1.20 tomorrow, right? So if you're looking at what $1 tomorrow is going to be like, it's not going to be worth $1 today. It's only going to be worth about 80 cents, 82 cents, something like that. It's discounted. Why? Because, 82 cents today could grow to $1 tomorrow. So you don't need as much today to be equivalent to $1 tomorrow. Okay, so this is what this idea of present value looks like. It sort of says, well, supposing I take this, whatever the interest rate is, or this discount rate, and if that's 20%, then I'll put on 1 plus 0.2, 20%, 1.2, divide by into 24, and that's going to be what, 20? So the 24 will get discounted to 20. Now at a 20% discount rate, the present value of 24 is 20, so it's a loss of 20 versus a gain of 10. Okay, so it's not worth it doing. But you think, well, what if the discount factor is really high? Why would it be high? Well, it's because you put a lot of value on the present as compared to the future, or you're really uncertain about the future. Okay, so you're going to have a high discount factor, and then it's like, okay, I might make this loss out in the future of 24, but when I discount it, it's much less than the 10. Therefore, it's better to defect. Okay. Now the idea is we want to figure out a best response. We'd like the tit for tat to be a best response for each of the players. So we're trying to figure out, is it worth their while to defect? And the answer is yes. Okay. It can be, but it can also not be. And the difference lies in this discount factor. And here's the basic reasons up here of why you might think that in a repeated game, you're not going to get cooperation, or why in a repeated game you might get cooperation. Okay, and it all has to do with how people's preferences towards the future. The preferences are kind of described by this time preference, this impatience, or their uncertainty about the future. Okay, and as long as people put some value on future interaction, then you'll be able to get this cooperative behavior in the stage game. Where in the Prisoner's Dilemma, we could never figure out a way, just in the one-shot game, why players wouldn't defect. But in the repeated game, okay, as long as people put some value in the future, it's not too uncertain, they're not too impatient, then you could get repeated cooperation. There'd be tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Nobody's defecting. Why would they? Okay, because it's the best response not to. Okay, but if something happens so that things are a little more ambiguous, so you become more uncertain, you put a little more impatience under there, then defecting becomes the best response, and it'll be the breakdown of that cooperation. So let's have a look at this idea of a tit for tat strategy in a repeated game. And this can work to help sustain cooperation, okay? In situations where, if you look at it one shot, you wouldn't get the cooperative result. So the tit for tat is kind of nice. It's different in Grimm. And the first thing is that it is nice, okay? It starts off being cooperative. You know, you cooperate with me, I cooperate with you. But the second thing is that there's something will trigger a reaction. It's provocable, okay? If you continue to cooperate all the time, other people are going to take advantage of you. Okay, you've got to have a strategy that can be provoked. It can be triggered. It's also forgiving. Okay, it's not like the Grimm strategy is, you know, once you've done one bad thing for me, I'm going to keep on retaliating against you. It's like, okay, I'll keep on retaliating, but if you come back to cooperation, I will come back. So it's forgiving. Okay, and the other thing is it's clear. You know, it's a nice, simple strategy. In complex games, it's very difficult to kind of figure out all the possible strategies. But here's something in repeated interaction that could sustain cooperation amongst basically self-interested people. Okay. Now, this is kind of a neat sort of concept. It's saying Prisoner's Dilemma brings all kinds of difficulties about collective action. We sort of think rationality goes, you know, if it's a rational thing to do, it turns out to be an irrational thing to do, and you both get lousy payoffs. But that's only one shot. If you have the repeated interaction, you could take something like a tit-for-tat strategy and expect cooperative behavior. Okay? Now, I put down a summary here, which I haven't given you the last bit, about the conditions which help us understand why these repeated games, when they will lead to cooperative versus non-cooperative behavior, or if you like, more trusting rather than opportunistic behavior if we change the game. And there's the basic ideas of we need some sort of long-term relationships. If they're short-term, okay, then you can expect to be taken advantage of. I know I had a classic case in the Sydney Tower in Sydney. My partner and I went out for a meal, and we're kind of thinking, oh, it'd be kind of cool to go up in the tower and look out over the city and have a nice meal. It was $50 Australian each, and the food was terrible. You know, it was terrible. For that much money, I mean, I would have expected some half-decent sort of dinner, and I mean, the view was fantastic. I didn't know if I'd known the food was that bad, it wouldn't have gone up. Okay, but they can take advantage of. They don't have much repeated interaction. Okay, all of the people who are coming through there are probably tourists. Once you learn that the food isn't bad, you're not going back there again. Okay, so if you've only got short-term transactions going on, you can expect that you won't have this cooperative outcome. It also depends on the size of the temptation. Okay, for example, supposing you guys were to pay me money to give you the exam before you go into it. Temptation for me, but probably couldn't give me enough money, right? Because I'd be fired. And so my future is I'd have a really terrible reputation. My future is I'd be losing lots of income, and I can't imagine unless I had a class of 1,000 like Stephen Hickson, okay, where he could get a lot of bribes. That would maybe be worth his while to do. Okay, so the idea is the temptation can't be can't be too strong, otherwise it's not going to support the cooperation. The other thing is about the punishment. Okay, turns out you want the punishment to be quite strong, because that's going to make defecting quite difficult. And then there's another idea here about in the simple game we have. It's really, we're saying we're looking back. We play the 2x2 game once, we can see what happens. We play it again, we can see what happens. We play it again, we can see what happens. And it's really easy to see what happens, to know what's going to trigger a response. Okay, but in real life situations, it's actually sometimes difficult to know, was that just a mistake the guy made, or maybe there was something it doesn't look like the right thing to do, but I can't really tell. So again, I think of doctor-patient relationships are like this. When I've had I think I've told you I have this condition called osteoporosis, where my spine has collapsed. And when it started in the late 80s, I went to a specialist who looked at an X-ray, and he told me there was something wrong with my back. And I had been having these sort of back problems, and as a consequence of that, I figured, okay, it's just a bunch of back pain, and keep doing stuff. And I went for a long camping trip, and I ended up, my partner got quite tired, ended up carrying her pack out, big pack, and I'm almost 100% sure that event was the occasion for my first collapsed vertebrae. And when I look back, I sort of think, why didn't that doctor, why didn't he tell me, why didn't he get a new X-ray? Why didn't he look more closely at it? Because, if he had actually gone to the trouble of doing that, another X-ray or another kind of scan, some sort of investigative test, maybe I would have done something different like that. Okay, and so I look back and I can tell clearly there that my doctor didn't do something they should have. On the other hand, there are interactions with my doctor where I don't know. I think, and he may not know, but I don't know either whether it's something he's done. Maybe it's a mistake that he made, maybe it is the right thing. How can I tell? And so I might wait a little bit before I trigger my response. Okay, now, when you have situations where it's difficult to tell whether or not the person has kind of defected from the trusting or cooperative relationship you want, then you might not get cooperative behavior because you think, I just don't trust it. There's too much uncertainty there. Okay. People make mistakes as well. If the chances of making mistakes are pretty high, that means the future is going to be uncertain. Discount factor gets higher. You think it's not worth it. Okay. Now, this whole idea of repeated interaction is connected with theory, and a theory about how we could develop a cooperative behavior through a system of reputations. Okay, so people interact with one another. It's a strategic interaction situation. In the short run, their self-interest, may take over. I'm an employee or employers, and the employee could shirk. I'm a doctor, and I'm a patient, and the doctor could do some dodgy kinds of things. But you'd like this reputation system to be built up. This theory of repeated games is a good way of trying to think about the kind of social institutions that would encourage healthy reputations. Okay. Now, for example, I go back to the doctor case. I know that guy back in 1988, to me, he did the wrong thing. He was a professional. He looked at a 1.5-year-old X-ray. He should have gone to a new X-ray that just would have been good practice. Okay, I know it. I don't even know if he knows it, but nobody else knows it. How can that affect his reputation? Okay, the system of reputation is going to have some sort of feedback about these things. Now, I put on the web, which you don't have to read for the exam, David Duranov is a very good health economist in the States, and he wrote a paper on health report cards for doctors. Okay? Now, you guys, you're used to report cards from your dot, right? And academics are getting report cards. So these guys, the idea of these health report cards is to get public information out about doctors. So that patients so that it'll enhance the reputation system. It'll help patients make better decisions, but it'll also impact back on doctors, so they might think of doing more reliable, not doing kind of as much dodgy sort of stuff. Okay, so his whole paper is about, does this help the reputation system, or does it make things worse? Okay, turns out there's an adverse selection problem with this, in that the docs. They stop treating difficult people, okay? And, that's one thing they do. They don't want to have bad report cards, and they don't have complete control over the outcome like this, but if they get bad outcomes, it's not just because they're bad docs, it's because they've had hard patients, so they stop treating more difficult patients, which, sure, it gives lots of information. These guys are good, but at least a lot of people dying or or not necessarily dying, but put at greater risk because doctors and hospitals are willing to treat them. So that the idea of a reputation system, like with doctors and patients, is part of a repeated game. But when you try to fix it up by making it more publicly observable, so people who are in the game can actually respond and act different ways, it also has some outside effects where maybe you wouldn't come into this game. Okay. So anyhow, the idea of the repeated games, we've only looked at it for a little while, but it's a very useful way of getting a handle on this idea of reputation systems, which can help cooperation and help trust. Now, the next thing I want to look at is the idea of credibility. In Chapter 10, there's a really important concept about strategic moves. And what we've done is we've looked at a bunch of stylized games, and we tried to analyze equilibrium ideas, where equilibrium is this notion of Nash equilibrium, intelligent people predicting what best responses are of other people, seeing if those best responses fit together into a mutually kind of consistent way. And we think, yeah, there are Nash equilibria, best response type expectations that people could share in repeated interaction. But sometimes those don't lead to good outcomes. So, for example, in the prisoner's dilemma, or maybe a game of chicken, or for whatever reason, you would like to change a game. And that's called theory of strategic moves. It's the idea is, in a game, we have the players, what can they do, what their information is, and what their payoffs are. Okay? So you could think, how could you change the game? Well, you can change any one of those components, any one of the four repeated components. So if you want to change a game in your favor, then you want to think about being able to make what are called strategic moves. And they fall into three categories. One is a commitment, the other is a promise, and the other is a threat. So again, I'd like you to read that in the text. I'm not going to cover all of that material here. We will try to look at threats today and a little bit at an example of a promise, and look at the problem of credibility. Okay. So I've put up a simple sequential game. The sequential game has two players. There's a challenger, a red player, who can either challenge or not. And if he doesn't challenge, then there's a status quo payoff for the red player of 0, and a higher number for the blue player, which is their best outcome. Okay? On the other hand, if they do challenge, then the blue player is going to have to either fight back, retaliate in some way, or they can acquiesce, okay, give in. And the idea with the payoffs here is that if the red player challenges and the blue player acquiesces, then they both get a payoff of 1. Now, the red 1 is better than the status quo for the challenger. The challenger prefers that to have the other to challenge, have the other guy acquiesce, and rather than not challenge at all. But for the blue player doesn't like acquiescing. It's not as good as if the other guy just doesn't challenge me. Okay, and the worst situation for both of them is that they end up fighting. So you get a challenger who fights. It's bad for the challenger. It's bad for the blue player. Okay? Now, if we do our rollback reasoning on this simple little threat game, we can see from the blue player's standpoint that if the guy does challenge, then it's better for me to acquiesce and not give in to this fight than it is to fight. Okay? Because I've got a higher payoff here. When the red player anticipates all this, you can look at challenging and get a payoff of 1, expecting you to acquiesce, or not challenge and get a payoff of 0. He's going to challenge, and we get our rollback path of play and our rollback equilibrium, which we know is a Nash equilibrium. Okay. So you're sitting there as the blue player, and you think, I don't like this. I want to deter this guy from challenging me. I want to do something that will threaten him that I'm going to fight back. Okay. And what we do is we introduce a new game. So a strategic game is a new game, and it has an earlier stage that you call the pregame. Okay, and this is kind of, you got to do something in the pregame which will change the subsequent game. So we're going to think of threatening this guy. Okay, if you come in, you challenge me, I'm going to fight you. Okay, and as a matter of fact, I've put sort of this as a hiss and a roar, because at the moment, these are just words, okay? I'm saying, I am going to fight you. And then otherwise you could make no threats. And then what do? We put after we make this pregame, we put our actual game. So this is the actual game we had up here, the threat game. If we don't make any threats, then the challenger is going to come in, we're going to acquiesce, and we're going to end up here. And if we say to this guy, look, you fight me, I'm going to fight you back, you're going to get a payoff of -2. Really? Says the challenger. Okay? Because he looks at this threatening, this hissing and roaring, and he says, well, the game isn't any different after all that. Okay, you're just posturing. And what we think of is that when you make these threats and promises, if they're just in words or just in gestures which are not very costly, then it's just cheap talk. Okay? You can ignore it. I mean, it's talk. People communicate. They say lots of things, but it doesn't make any difference to what you expect to happen. Now, the whole point about a strategic game is that you're trying to change it. Okay? So the idea is we have an expectation of what we think is going to happen if we don't make the threat. We want to make the threat, and then we're looking at the game and we're thinking, I haven't changed it at all. Even though I've made the threats, it hasn't changed the other person's view of the game. Okay? So we have to do something to change the other person's view of the game. Now, the two key ideas are, with both threats and promises and these commitments, is you could change the game to reduce your freedom of action. Okay, that would be eliminating some moves in the game. Or you could change the payoffs in the game, particularly your own payoffs. Okay, and we'll see why that's necessary to change your own payoffs. Remember, those are the two key ways in which you're going to be able to make your attempts to change a situation credible. Because, again, the idea is we have our theory, we have some game that people are playing, somebody wants to change it, so they're going to do something. Why should the other people believe there's going to be any change? You have to do something to make them change their expectations or beliefs. Now, one thing you could think of here was, well, supposing I'm the blue player, supposing I could eliminate my ability to acquiesce, make it, automatic that I'm going to fight back, right? Then what would happen? If the challenger then looks at this situation here and at this game, and I've eliminated a course of action for me, I've eliminated some flexibility, then this isn't going to be an option. He's going to be looking at getting -2 or 0. Okay? If he challenges, he gets -2. If he doesn't challenge, he gets 0. Okay? So with the threat, I can change his beliefs if I could change make it automatic that I wouldn't acquiesce. Now, I put in a little DVD player a clip from Dr. Strangelove. Have any of you seen Dr. Strangelove? Never? Dr. Strangelove is what? Made in the 1960s with Peter Sellers. It's an amazing movie. It's a cult kind of classic. And it's about nuclear deterrence. Okay? It's both a parody and a warning. It's still got as much relevance then as it is now, and the acting is kind of superb. But what the text talks about this as well. They think of it as it's called a doomsday device. There's an automatic fulfillment. So you eliminate some course of action, and the other one's going to become automatic. So I thought I'd play you about 3 minutes out of this clip. The first 30 seconds is a little bit hard to hear. There's a Russian guy who's talking he's not Russian. He's pretending to be a Russian actor, and his voice is a little bit difficult to follow. But then you get into the dialogue between these guys about what will be a threat. Okay, what will be a credible threat on the part of the Russians to make sure that the Americans don't challenge them. Okay, so listen and enjoy. I'll put my mic down here close to these speakers because I don't know how to do it otherwise.
So that in 10 months, the surface of the earth will be as dead as the moon.
Come on, Mr. That's ridiculous. Our studies show that even the worst fallout is down to a safe level after 2 weeks.
You've obviously never heard of cobalt thorium G.
Well, what about it?
Cobalt thorium G has a radioactive half-life of 93 years. If you take, say, 50 H-bombs in the 100 megaton range and jacket them with cobalt thorium G, when they are exploded, they will produce a doomsday shroud. A lethal cloud of radioactivity which will encircle the Earth for 93 years.
Oh, what a load of commie bull. I mean, after all.
Afraid I don't understand something, Alexei. Is the Premier threatening to explode this if our planes carry out their attack?
No, sir. It is not a thing a sane man would do. The Doomsday Machine is designed to trigger itself automatically.
But surely you can disarm it somehow?
No, it is designed to explode if any attempt is ever made to untrigger it.
Automatically?
Ah, it's an obvious commie trick, Mr. President. We're wasting valuable time. Look at the big boy. They're getting ready to clobber us.
But this is absolute madness, Ambassador. Why should you build such a thing?
There were those of us who fought against it, but in the end we could not keep up with the expense involved in the arms race, the space race, and the peace race. And at the same time, our people grumbled for more nylons and washing machines. Our doomsday scheme cost us just a small fraction of what we've been spending on defense in a single year. But the deciding factor was when we learned that your country was working along similar lines, and we were afraid of a doomsday gap.
This is preposterous. I've never approved of anything like that.
Our source was the New York Times.
Dr. Strangelove, do we have anything like that in the works?
A moment, please, Mr. President. Under the authority granted me as Director of Weapons Research and Development, I commissioned last year a study of this project by the Bland Corporation. Based on the findings of the report, my conclusion was that this idea was not a practical deterrent, for reasons which at this moment must be all too obvious.
Then you mean it is possible for them to have built such a thing?
Mr. President, the technology required is easily within the means of even the smallest nuclear power. It requires only the will to do so.
But how is it possible for this thing to be triggered automatically and at the same time impossible to untrigger?
Mr. President, it is not only possible, it is essential. That is the whole idea of this machine, you know. Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack. And so, because of the automated and irrevocable decision-making process which rules out human meddling, the Doomsday Machine is terrifying, it's simple to understand, and completely credible and convincing.
Gee, I wish we had one of them Doomsday Machines, Stainsy.
But this is fantastic, Strangelove. How can it be triggered automatically?
Well, it's remarkably simple to do that. When you merely wish to bury bombs, there's no limit to the size. After that, they are connected to a gigantic complex of computers. Now then, a specific and clearly defined set of circumstances under which the bombs are to be exploded is programmed into a tape memory bank. A single roll of tape can store all the information.
What kind of a name is that? That ain't no crowd name, is it, Stainsy? He changed it when he became a citizen. It used to be Merkwürdig. A crowd by any other name, most of it.
Is that the whole point of the Doomsday Machine is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
It was to be announced at the Party Congress on Monday. As you know, the Premier loves surprises.
Okay, the movie goes on to play around with this idea of the doomsday device as being an effective deterrent. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but I won't spoil the ending for you. There's a video clip by Thomas Schelling that I put up on the web. Again, it's not for the exam, but it's Schelling's Nobel Award speech. Okay, and in that, what he talks about is the role of nuclear deterrence, where it's worked for the last 60, 70 years, okay? And he goes back into the 50s and 60s where he makes this really strong case that nobody then believes that if they were looking 40 years in the future, that there wouldn't be some sort of nuclear armed conflict in the future back then. I mean, I don't know. I was just a kid back then, and you guys weren't even alive. But he tells a story about how this nuclear deterrence has actually worked. I mean, it's terrible, like he says. There's terrible fear, but it's quite a convincing argument. Okay, so let's just go back to the our basic little game. Part of Strangelove, Peter Sellers' thing there is that this pre-game move has to be observable, okay? You make the threat, and you do something, and you want to convey it to the other people so they know what it is. You want to make it directly observable, and that will restrict them from challenging because they think you're going to have to fight and they're going to get these bad payoffs. Okay, now, that has to do with threats. What about promises? Well, the promises are a similar kind of idea, is that problem with the promise often is that when it comes time for you to fulfill your conditions of your promise, you don't want to do it, okay? And that's what we're going to look at in a simple little example of some interaction between a parent and a child. Now, the idea here is you want your child to do a lot of study and get good grades, or they cannot study. And the parent in blue can either reward them or not reward them, okay? And I've set up the payoffs so that if you look at it, the best outcome for the child is where they don't have to study and they get the reward. And the worst one is where they study but they don't even get a reward, okay? Now, those also happen to be exactly the opposite of what the parents want. The parents' preferences with their third best would be, higher numbers are better. So their second from the top would be if the child studies and they reward him. You think, well, why isn't that the top for the parent? Well, that's because giving a reward is costly, okay? We're going to see if you had a soft parent, you could have a situation where parents always love to reward their kids. But supposing the reward is big, like you're going to promise a trip, okay? Or there's a trip involved here. And the idea being to pay for the trip is going to cost you, okay? As a parent, you sort of think, oh, I'd rather they just studied, and I didn't have to reward them, right? So that's the parent's preferences. So if we look at the rollback of this game, the idea with the child is that they're thinking, well, look at if they reward me up here or up here, then I'm always better not studying. They got a dominant strategy to not study, okay? So I mean, the idea here is that the child would have this strategy of not studying. Given they don't study, the parent isn't going to reward them, and they're both down at this bad outcome here. So what you might think of is the parent thinking, I don't like this. I want to get my kid to study. What can I do? So I'll make a promise. Okay, let's have a look at the promise. That's the pre-game. Okay, we put in a new stage to the game. It's like, I can reward them after they study, or not reward them, or I can make a new game where I can promise to reward them. Okay, so here up the game is the game with no promise, and this is what we expect to happen. Remember, the whole idea of the strategic move game is to change the child's expectations about what's going to happen. So if you make a promise that if you study hard, you're going to get a reward, well, we'd like them to go up to this path up here, but there's a problem, okay? And the problem is that for the child to look at this and study, they're going to realize that it's a costly promise for you. You'd rather not fulfill it, and they're not going to get the reward. So the child's anticipation is just what it is up here. Okay. So we have to ask about the credibility of that. Right. Now, what you can do is you can think of here. There are various things you could do. We looked at one where you reduced your freedom of action in the threat game. Here, supposing you change the payoffs. Okay. Now, it's not just changing the payoffs to the child, but changing your own payoffs. And what you want to do is you want to make it so it's in your interest to carry out that promise. Now, one thing you do in a family situation sometimes, I know in my family, my mom was the soft person, my dad was the kind of hard person, and so my mom, if she's in a situation like this, she's going to delegate it to my dad. Okay, or my dad, who's the hard person, he's perceived as not very trustworthy, wouldn't give rewards, he would delegate it to my mom. Okay, so they would use this family dynamics to change the reward structure. Okay, and that's one way of changing the payoffs is to kind of take yourself out of the picture and delegate it to someone else. This works. This can work quite well. I don't want to betray things here, but there is a little policy in the university where students often have a problem with sitting exams. Okay, I mean they don't want to sit them, but also they want to do sporting match things. They want to travel. There's lots of they want to go see their parents. There are all kinds of reasons that they come up with why they don't want to do the exam on that particular night. Now the problem is that they come and approach me, and I'm kind of a nice guy. I'm sort of perceived to be a nice guy, and I want to kind of keep this nice guy reputation because it works out sometimes. It's good to have students who are depressed come and approach you and talk to you, and they also ask for help, and I like that feeling about myself. On the other hand, it's a pain in the butt to have to write an exam for somebody else to fulfill this kind of thing. See? So what I do is I say, well, the university has a policy. Okay? I get out of the picture and say, well, this is the university's policy. And so I change the payoffs from the student's perception of saying, well, see, he's not dealing with John, he's dealing with the registry or university policy. And so I kind of delegate the authority out there to somebody else to decide, and that's how I change the game. Okay? I put on the handout a couple of examples of if you delegated in the parent thing, you could either have a soft parent or a sadistic parent. You have to be a little careful, okay? Because inside this game here where you're trying to change your expectations, so you've got to do something to change those numbers, okay? There also is an implicit threat that if they don't study, they're going to not get the reward. And that was the problem with my dad delegating to my mom, is she was a good person, she's a soft parent basically, and it's like you're going to get the reward whether you study or not, And the problem with my mom delegating to my dad, I don't want to say sadistic, but it was like, that's metaphorical, okay? In terms of studying, it was like he just didn't like to give the rewards. So the idea of delegating, you have to be a little careful, because remember, we got PDIP. Who are the players? What can they do? What's their information? What are their payoffs? As soon as you bring in another player to the game, you change the strategic interaction in the game. What are their payoffs? Okay, then you want to analyze that new game. Okay, but the idea of the strategic move thing is that you do want to try to change people's beliefs or expectations, and the idea is to make in the pregame, when you make a promise or a threat, you've got to do more than just say the words. You've got to take some costly action that are going to change your payoffs or reduce your freedom of action. Okay. Now, in the text, there's two basic ways: reducing your freedom of action or changing your payoffs. And under each of those headings, they list a number of things you could try to change a game. Okay. Now, just remember, it doesn't matter what the game is. I mean, there's some strategic interaction going on. One or other of the players, or both, want to change the game. Okay, and to change the game is to design the new game beforehand. That usually involves a commitment, a promise, or a threat. The problem is, are those threats going to be, or promises, or commitments going to be believable? Okay, and there are 10 ways in which you can try to make them believable. But you can't just use the cheap talk solution. You can have lots of dialogue and words and stuff like that, but you expect intelligent, rational people to see through that. I mean, we all do it with salespeople or advertising kind of things, and we know that it's just talk, right? We just listen to it, it babbles on, it doesn't change our beliefs at all. Okay, hardly even informs us. But when they start to take costly actions, like reducing their freedom of action by delegating the doomsday device, some sort of automatic fulfillment. There's an example of Cortez. I think it might be apocryphal rather than real, but that when he invaded the Americas, he had a very small contingent of soldiers against millions of Native Americans, and he sent his bridges back. He sent the boats back. So they had to fight. They couldn't get. It made them not only made his men fight harder, but it made other people think, "Who is this guy? He's willing to burn his bridges. There's no retreat. They're going to fight. It's going to be bad for us. We better acquiesce." Okay. On the other hand, it could work against you. I mean, it was just the toss of a coin that it didn't work against Cortez, I'll tell you. Very, very dicey, and history would have been totally different if he hadn't been able to subdue those, the Aztecs. Very different. Okay, so these are ways that you can reduce your freedom of action, and that's a little puzzle, okay? Because you think about it, isn't rationality all about having flexibility and adaptability and stuff like that? Yes. But flexibility and adaptability aren't necessarily good things if you need to change somebody else's expectations. Trust being a classic example. You want to, people are going to trust you. You might want to reduce your ability to make changes in things so they've got some assurance that you're not going to opt out. You're not going to act opportunistically because you've eliminated those courses of action, okay? Or made some automatic sort of things. The changing the payoffs is a very interesting way to make games credible. Change the game to make promises, threats, or commitments credible. And often there we think of writing contracts. Now the idea of writing contracts is, again, communicating, right? I communicate with you, you communicate with me, we communicate in writing. Why is writing any different than cheap talk words? Well, one reason is once you've written it down, it's there, and some other party, a third party, could try to enforce those contracts. Now usually the third party could be, you could think of it as the state, with the courts and the police, or you could just think of it as a social group, okay? That, for example, wedding ceremony, classic sort of example where you're making these verbal statements of affection and love and long-term commitment and things like that, but you do it openly in front of all of your friends. So that later on, if you renege, you're going to feel really embarrassed. Plus, your friends are going to be involved to try to hold you back to the promises that you made. I mean, it's a great device. It's not foolproof, okay, but it's certainly better than just cheap talk. Good. Okay, so next Tuesday we'll kind of wrap up the course. And remember, on Wednesday, Thursday, we have these tutorial sessions or help sessions if you happen to be doing some studying. For those of you who've emailed me back about getting the